Good morning, good morning to you, you. Good morning, good morning to you. Good morning, good morning. Won't you share with a friend or two? Good morning, good morning to you. Good morning, good morning, good morning to you. You. Good morning, good morning. Good morning to you and many more and many more and many more. Good morning, good morning, good morning, and welcome, welcome, welcome to Daring Dialogues. I'm your host today, Shantae Charles, and this is Teachable Tuesday, Black Table Talk. This is our last Tuesday of the season, and I will be back in November with a new season. But this is our last Tuesday for season 16. If you're with me for the first time, you can tell me where you are watching or viewing from, where you are supporting from. I am double broadcasting today, which in season 17, we're actually going to start, we're going to move our double broadcast day to Mondays due to my schedule because I want to make sure that we get the full length of time to talk about things that are all things melanated, all things black, all things black history, all things black people, all things black polity, the things that encourage and inform us. So I have right now turned off my comments on YouTube because we are double broadcasting on Facebook. So if you want to make comments and you want to possibly join me online, you can go to my Facebook page, Black Table Talk, where we are simultaneously broadcasting for today. That just helps me to have my focus as far as comments on one particular screen, and that helps me with my attention span. So, there has been a lot going on, right? There has been the No Kings protests that have been going on. People have felt some kind of way about it, either way, whether you chose to participate or not. In my space, I told people we're not knocking anyone for participating, but we also need to understand that demonstrations, because it wasn't really a protest, we need to understand that demonstrations are about making the issue visible, and that that's not the end all be all, and that's just a starting place. If you studied resistance movements, that's a starting place, not an ending place. But I'm not going to disparage the people that went out and made themselves visible for the cause. But we do need to understand that that's a starting place and not an ending place. Um, in in the world of Black church news, there's lots of questionable things happening there, but I'm going to cover those things on Thursday, and hopefully some of the theologians that I know will be chiming in with that. Some people of note that I definitely want to encourage you to follow around that. If you are not familiar with Allie Henny, Alllyhenny, I encourage you to follow her. She is a Black theologian. She's also a chaplain. If you are not familiar with Dr. Jamar Tisby, JEMAR TISBY, Jamar Tisby, I encourage you to follow him. He is also a theologian. If you are not familiar with Andre Henry, ANDREHENRY, he is also a Black theologian. And if you are not familiar with Dante, what's his last name? Stewart. If you're not familiar with Dante Stewart, DANTE, accent over the E, Stewart, STEWART, I encourage you to follow him. If you are not familiar with Diane, DIANNE, Stewart as well, I encourage you to follow her. Okay? I love to tell people I don't have all the answers, but I follow very smart people who have more answers than I do when it comes to certain topics. So, those are some of the people that I follow. Those are some of the people that I read who have books out as well that is dealing with faith issues in the context of America, Black American faith issues, Black love issues, all of that. Those names that I just named, they all have books out. So please go get them, go read them, go support them. If you have a podcast, invite them to come and share their knowledge base and their information. Obviously, they are Black men and women in the theological space. So please pay them. Yeah, let's not do the free labor thing with Black people. But if you're inviting them on, pay them. All right. So yeah, I just wanted to give you some people that you might want to consider following. If you're with me for the first time live, you can say hello in the comment section. I see quite a few of you that I see down in the comments, engaging with us on a regular basis. Two books that we are going to be looking at very briefly because unfortunately I'm on a time crunch today. But we're going to come back and look into Black AF history, the unwhitewashed story of America. As I said, as we transition to season 17, which will be in November, instead of coming on live on Tuesdays, we will come live on Mondays. That way I can give you all a full hour of my time. All right. But before we hop back into Black AF history, October, in case some of you did not know, is Hoodoo Heritage Month. I have a whole entire series on hoodoo on my YouTube channel. It's under the playlist Understanding Hoodoo, its origins. But this month is Hoodoo Heritage Month. Hello and good morning. This month is Hoodoo Heritage Month. And a lot of people have misconceptions about hoodoo, what hoodoo is. I spent about 7 hours teaching on hoodoo. There's a whole playlist on YouTube about it. So if you want to understand it from the shores of Africa all the way over to um, the Americas and how it has matriculated and where hoodoo is now in the culture, um, feel free to check out that playlist. Also, there's a really wonderful group here on Facebook entitled um, Homesteading and Hoodoo or Hoodoo and Homesteading. If you search that, it will come up in the groups tab on Facebook. I encourage you to check that group out. It is a public group. In case many people don't know, hoodoo is actually a closed practice to the African American culture. And so a lot of people um, get into the commercial side of hoodoo, but the actual hoodoo practice is actually a closed practice. So there is a new book out that is dealing with both hoodoo and voodoo, I believe, and it's called The Conjuring of America. And when I saw this book, I said, I absolutely have to get it because I spent several months reading and studying hoodoo. And so this is one of the latest books out on some of the practices. The subtitle is Mojo's Mermaids Medicine and 400 Years of Black Women's Magic. All right. So it's a book, again, if you want to dive more into hoodoo and understanding the history behind it, I suggest that you add this book to your library. I'm not sure if it is on Libby app. It might be on there. Um, and there might be, I'm sure there's probably an ebook. So if you want to look in the digital space and see if you can find it and download it, feel free. But I don't want to start this just yet. I want to get into season 17 before we start this book because I don't want to, I want to give it its just due. All right, so we're looking at Black AF history. And as I said, I said I had something to show you also. Let me go grab it. All right, so last time we were reading Black AF history, we had finished up chapter one, which was talking about Earth, Wind, and America and the Great Colonial Project. And Michael Harriot began to talk about Pocahontas, also known as Rebecca, also known as Matawaka, right? And I was in a antique store last week, I believe it was. Yeah, last week. Time is flying by. And on the antique shelf, they had this. And at first, it was just sitting on the shelf behind a whole bunch of other things. And I saw the word Matawaka. Now, at the time, I was like, okay, I can't. I see Rebecca, I see Matawaka. So I was like, I think that's Pocahontas. And so I picked the plate up and I said, okay, I see Virginia on here. I see Powhatan. And I said, okay, I'm going to put a bid on the plate. And so when I brought it up to the counter, they didn't know what they had. Like they didn't know what they had in their possession, which is crazy to me. Um, and so I put a bid on it, and they priced it $1 below what I was willing to pay for it. And as they were wrapping it up, I said to them, I said, you know that's Pocahontas on the plate, right? Y'all should have seen that man's face. Y'all should have seen that man's face. It was like all of the blood drained from his face after he sold me this plate. And then I said, have a nice day. um, and so I went home and I said, let me price this plate. Let me actually see if there are other copies of it, or, what might be the actual current monetary value for it. And so I priced it, and the current monetary value for the plate is $200. Um, there are other editions of the plate. There are a couple other companies that make plate prints, but this particular one was priced at $200, and I got it for $24. I was like, thank you. So I am giving my public thanks. I'm giving my public thanks to Michael Harriot's Black AF History because, and somebody said it here, the first two names were names given to her by the colonizers, right? But I don't think I ever read anywhere before here and before here that her original name was Matawaka. So because I read that here, when I was in the antique shop and I saw the name, I knew that it could possibly be her that was on the plate. And turns out That is a copy of her, of a painting that was done of her, that is actually, I think, in the Smithsonian. And this is supposed to be her around the age of 21 in 1616. This was a painting that was done. So I'm pretty excited about that. That sometimes we don't see how the history that we're sharing or the history that we're reading is connecting um, to some real life things here, and that was pretty cool. Let's look at chapter 2. And again, I am not going to be able to read for very long. I'm probably going to just read for a few minutes here to start this chapter. The chapter is entitled The Church Fight That Started Slavery. The Church Fight That Started Slavery. Now, um, we have done a little bit of teaching around this in my other capacity as a spiritual leader, but he's going to dive into the social hierarchy part. He's going to dive into how we got to this color based social hierarchy. And there is a film out. I don't know if it's still on streaming sites anymore, but I would probably say it was the most intense and accurate um, telling of what was happening during this time. And some of you may have heard of it. It's a Turkish series entitled Ertugrul. To me, that series has been like the most comprehensive series to deal with what was happening with faith, religion, with the Muslims, with the Christians at the time, with the Mongols. All of them are featured in this intensely long but very well done series. And it's called Ertugrul Resurrection, I believe. Ertugrul Resurrection. I will try to put the link here after I'm done, so anybody who wants to go and check out that series can. But it was showing during the pandemic, so obviously with people being inside, we had a lot of time to look at all of the episodes, and every single episode was very detailed. It was historically based. As they were talking about the people in the names, I could actually go and look up the people, look up the names and stuff. So I learned a lot about the Mongols and the Muslims and the Christians and their intersection through that series. But let's start here. He says there are entire books about the history of European religions, social caste systems, and how Europeans turned the African continent into a factory for raw human material. And I wish I had time to talk more about that. But when people talk about Brexit, or when people talk about Black people leaving the United States, and when people think or assume that millions of Black people are just going to be able to um, get up and leave the country, and the United States is not going to push back on their citizens leaving the country, they failed to understand that citizens in this country are seen as raw human material, also known as human resources, also known as hands to the work. So you have to understand that about America. As much as this country talks crap about Black people, they also see us as human capital. Okay? So just keep that in mind when you're reading about these back to Africa campaigns. I want you to keep in mind that as there are somewhere 40 plus million of us in this country, they're not just going to let, even 20 million of us just hop up and go to another country. That's literally their human resources, taking their knowledge, taking their experience, taking their wisdom, and shipping it out to another country. They would sooner get rid of us than have us to do that. So I want people to think about that as you are making your exit plan, some of you. But to understand the origins of America's constitutionally enshrined human trafficking system, that legally reduce people to chattel, we must go back to the inception of the transatlantic African trade that formed the foundation of America's color based social hierarchy. It started at church. I'm going to just let that sit for a moment. It started at church. And as someone who is a spiritual leader, I don't have a problem with people knowing and understanding that truth. It started at church. But I see a lot of people getting defensive when people are calling the church to account for things that have happened. There's no need to get defensive. It's the truth. It started at church, the church. hmm After a little known woodworker named Jesus died, Christianity began trending in Europe long before the conservative Christian movement co opted the idea of using Christianity for the purpose of expanding a political base. The Roman Empire thought it might be a good idea to combine church and state for the sake of politics and world domination. Now, in my degree field, I get to study this quite a bit, but I get to teach it from the arts and creative perspective. But one of the things that we learn when we're talking about this notion of church and state is some of the first art that we begin to appreciate in the world comes out of being created or made in the service of politics and in the service of religion. Some of the most beautiful things that are on display in our museums right now, those things were created in service to the state or in service to religion. Yes, artists were brought into the fold. Many of them were paid, many of them were sponsored, or what we would call patrons. They had patrons that paid them to create art that promoted the state, that promoted religion, that promoted the faith in a certain way. Some of that today we would call propaganda art, like the propaganda art we see on the White House websites talking about America using AI images. Well, that's art in the service of religion. That's art in the service of the state. That's art in the service of the political. They were doing that way back when. So it's not a new thing. It's not a new idea. The Holy Roman Empire eventually fell, but the idea of using God's infallible human intercessor, the Pope, okay, if you are Catholic, you know him as the Cari Filidae, right? The Pope, as a political leader, continued making the Catholic Church the most powerful institution in Europe at the time. The Vatican had its own army. And if you're like me and you love religious history, you have probably been figuring this out. You've probably been studying about the Vatican, right? The Vatican had its own army. It settled disputes between countries and even negotiated treaties. In 1054, the church split into two factions. There was the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church, each of them controlling different parts of the European continent. Now, as it relates to our story, what you need to know is this. Since 711, North Africa and Arab Muslims, known as Moors, controlled different parts of the Al Andalus or the Iberian Peninsula, which was home to the countries we now know as Spain, which was home to the countries we now know as Spain and Portugal. To get control of their respective homelands, Spanish and Portuguese nobles assured the Pope that the Latin Church would see an increase in tithes and offerings if the Church supported the Reconquista, the 400-year-old struggle to rule the Iberian Peninsula. chance to expand its territory and gain some more revenue. So in 1123, Pope Calixtus proclaimed that the Reconquista was part of the Crusades, a series of religious wars to control the Holy Land and make the non Christians disappear. During this constant conflict between the Christian and Islamic kingdoms, Africans, Eastern Europeans, and Asians were all subject to varying forms of servitude. Although slavery existed during this time, it was never exclusively race based, nor was it as widespread and entrenched as it would become in the Americas. So when people say, well, slavery's been happening since time immemorial, well, that is true. But also, indentured servitude has been happening since time immemorial, and there are differences and they're not quite the same. When people say, I don't understand what the big deal is about American slavery versus other places, well, American slavery had what we call chattelism. America was comparing human beings to animals, as in presenting them as non-human. America's servitude, as he said, was race-based. Prior to what America did to the project of slavery and enslavement, nobody was doing that. Nobody was saying, literally because of the color of your skin, I'm going to subject not only you to enslavement, but everything that comes out of you, every generation that comes out of you into perpetuity, we want to enslave. There was no time frame on enslavement ending when you say into perpetuity. Okay, so those are some like basic differences. By the time Spain and Portugal reconquered their homelands in the early 1400s, centuries of warfare had left both countries in dire financial straits. Meanwhile, other European countries had emerged from the Dark Ages, they had finished their crusades, and revitalized their economies. If Portugal or Spain had any chance of existing alongside their European counterparts, they both needed new sources of income. And the best way to do that seemed to be through gaining control of the peninsula. This land grab spawned an intense rivalry, the likes of which wouldn't be experienced again until the dawn of the Prince versus Michael Jackson debate. After John of Aviz and his sons took control of Portugal from the Moors, he was crowned king. But he still had to figure out how to curry favor with the pastor by putting a little extra in the offering plate. Because Portugal was now essentially a new country, they didn't have a great credit score and their options were limited. Luckily, King John's son, Henrique, was obsessed with two things: boats and Africa. In 1415, when he was just 21 years old, Henrique distinguished himself in battle when he helped capture the North African city of Ceuta, which was slowly becoming an important trading outpost for Portugal. After the siege, Enrique heard stories that Africa was rich in gold, treasure, and unsophisticated Africans. Hank wasn't even thinking about the slave trade at the time. He had a simpler idea. Instead of expanding their territory through warfare, what if they found a new, unexplored territory and just took the resources and the land from the African savages? Seemed easy enough, but there was one problem: monsters. During the Middle Ages, the bravest white adventurers would embark on voyages for the sake of honor, glory, and obviously money. Back then, items that weren't locally available were highly coveted, especially pelts, metals, and spices. In the event that these seasoned salt seeking seafarers didn't return home, most people assumed the fearless travelers must have run into some kind of undefeatable beast. a story bolstered by the fact that every time European sailors tried to explore the West African coast, they never made it farther south than North Africa's Sahara Desert coast. It had to be monsters out there. What else but a saber-toothed leviathan could defeat these gallant pathfinders in their rickety ships? Undeterred, he sailed off to figure it out, where the Africans trading in the North African province of Ceuta were getting all of this gold. But time and time again, he failed miserably on his mission to make it there. How was Portugal going to satisfy Europe's most vital institution, the Catholic Church, if he did not have a pot of gold? If he didn't figure out something quick, the church might just let his neighbors in Spain take over. Then Enrique got another bright idea: cultural appropriation. For centuries, African Coptic sailors had been sailing in smaller boats called lateens, with triangular sails instead of the big ships with old school square sails used by the Europeans. Enrique asked one of his African servants captured during the Reconquista how to build these ships and avoid sea beasts. After the servant laughed for about 45 minutes at his captor's belief that a gang of gremlins was out here taking down ships, he informed them that the sea thugs were not killing white people. It was the wind. Using this new knowledge, Enrique assembled a few local cartographers to draw new maps. Instead of charting the land and the seas, they drew charts of the ocean currents and cornered the exploring market by mastering the trade winds. By the time Enrique was put in charge of the Portuguese version of the Knights Templar and appointed Grand Master of the Military Order of Christ on May 25th, 1420, he had taught a generation of Portuguese sailors how to maneuver ocean currents in these new lateen rigged caravels, earning a name that would last forever: Prince Henry the Navigator. So they figure out that it is the trade winds that are taking the people out. They learn to navigate around the trade winds, and so begins their route around to find new territory. All right, we're going to stop reading there for today. And I think I have time. I've got about 10 minutes here to do some talk back. If you're watching by YouTube, I want to thank you for your time and attention. If you want to join us for the talk back, feel free to move on over to our Facebook page, Black Table Talk. Thank you for your time and for your attention.